and welcome to today's episode of the Business Meets Fitness podcast with your host, Lauren Tickner, and I am so excited about this episode. I have Danny Lennon on today, and if you don't know who Danny is, he is the host of Sigma Nutrition Radio, which is one of the very best fitness podcasts. And I'm not just saying that because it is awesome and it has tons of evidence-based training and nutrition where they really dive in deep about certain topics and they bring on some of the most well-known and the most well-educated guests. I'm not just saying it because of that, I'm also saying it because of the charts. The charts don't lie, and Danny's podcast is always right up there. So his podcast is amazing. I could not recommend it more. And this podcast is awesome because not only do we talk about some of the specifics regarding flexible dieting and different patterns that Danny has seen through interviewing so many awesome people, and we really dive in deep about kind of some of the craziest things that Danny has learned through interviewing so many people, but we also talk about Danny's actual business model and what it's like to be the host of one of the very greatest fitness podcasts. So it's really, really cool. We talk about Danny's business, then we go into kind of more practicalities towards training and nutrition, and a lot about flexible dieting as well. So you can best believe that you're going to leave this podcast feeling like you've learned something, and like we had just an awesome chat, and it's great. And by the way, Danny is also a massive fan of Mass, which is a monthly research review that breaks down all of the most recent scientific literature into really easily digestible information that you can then implement right away, whether it's within your own training or your own nutrition or with your clients or social media followers. So I've left that linked in the show notes, but honestly, I could not recommend it more. Like seriously, I mean, I think especially if you are working in the fitness industry and you have clients, I think it's your duty to actually know this information. And I just think it's just invaluable, the amount of time that it saves you through researching your own things. And it also means that you're able to stay up to date and on trend. So if you're someone that's also producing social media content, which if you're listening to this and if you work in the fitness industry, or if you just post to social media about fitness content, then I think it's really, really important for you to know the most cutting edge and up to date information. Because if not, you could be saying the wrong thing. You could get people in a bit of bother, which could get you in a bit of bother. So the link to that is in the show notes. You can of course be getting a lot more high level scientific information through that. So again, couldn't recommend it more. Link in the show notes. Make sure to even just check out the sales page, which is what you will land on if you click on the show notes, because it will just give you a bit more of an understanding about what it is. And yeah, I just seriously think, if you have any questions about it, let me know. But anyway, let's get into today's episode. I know you're gonna love it. Please share it if you like it. That is all I ask. Tag me at Lauren Tickner. Enjoy today's episode. Hello, Danny. Welcome to the Business Meets Fitness podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me, Lauren. Really appreciate it.
It's awesome. No, Danny, I'm really excited to have you on today because your podcast was the very first podcast that I ever listened to. So it is quite an honor having you on.
Well, that's an honor hearing that I was the first choice. Somehow you managed to find mine above something else. So that's cool to hear.
No, it's great. I mean, your podcast goes into massive depth on all things training, nutrition, and it's a super informative podcast. So I'm hoping today that we can get some of that juicy information out of you to share with the listeners of the Business Meets Fitness podcast. But before we dive into all of that, and before we kind of get talking about the specifics when it does come to training and nutrition, I'd love it if you could just give the listeners a little bit of a background all about yourself, what you've been through, and how you've got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I'll try. I'll try not bore people, but maybe if anything is interesting, we can get more into that. But the kind of short version is that all growing up, my big interest was always just playing sports. So I played quite a lot of football or soccer, as we call it here in Ireland. Played Gaelic football, which is another sport we have here. Again, a field-based sport. Really interested in playing those. And then when I went to university for the first time, started doing some MMA and some jiu-jitsu and some combat sports like that. And it was around that time that when I went to college first, I started studying biology and physics. So at this time, I started learning how to read research, how to look up science journals, how to interpret the findings from different pieces of research. And so really just in my spare time as a hobby, because maybe I was a kind of a bit of a nerd like that, I would try and read stuff that would help me in my sporting performance. So at that time I was playing various different sports. I was in the gym just to help my performance on the pitch and on the mats. And so started reading stuff around like sports psychology, sports science, looking at then nutrition obviously came up. And then just when I started reading more about nutrition, it just, for whatever reason, grabbed me as particularly fascinating and really led me into areas outside of sports and really started getting interested in how nutrition helps in terms of our overall health, all the various different effects it can have, and how some of the information was maybe a bit different to what I'd previously presumed. And so kind of fast forward a couple of years from there, I ended up graduating with my degree, became a teacher and taught as a secondary school or high school teacher here in Ireland for a year, teaching biology, physics, and some maths. But during that time, there was just something that didn't sit right with me. I didn't like being within the school system. I liked the education part of it and teaching people, but just not within that school system. And in my own time, all I was doing was like focused on exercise and nutrition. So I was like, hey, let me go and do something here, see what happens. Went back to university, did my master's in nutritional sciences. And from there, decided just to go out and do my own thing. So set up, during college, I'd been writing on an old blog I had, then set up Sigma Nutrition after I kind of left, and worked on building that as both a coaching practice, which I'd had some people in person, started doing some online coaching there, started putting out more content. The podcast was started. And just from there, just kind of kept pushing on more and more and more. And that was, 4 or 5 years ago. And then here we are now today with Sigma Nutrition where it's at. Hopefully it's in a pretty good place and just trying to keep developing that more and more. So that's a kind of bit of an overview of how I end up at this point, but I'm happy to get into more detail on any particular point there that you wish.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And that's good to hear the whole entire story, because obviously I, first of all, came across your podcast. And so I didn't know about kind of all the other stuff that you're doing. So you started Sigma Nutrition through doing many online coaching, did you say? Or
yeah, so I had been, just I suppose when anyone first starts out, I'd been coaching a few people that I just knew kind of locally to try and build up some experience. And the idea with Sigma Nutrition originally was I wanted a kind of a platform to just kind of build some awareness around me. And I thought, okay, I'll set up my website. I'll be able to put out some articles. I'll do videos, do podcasts, and kind of like overestimating how much I would be able to actually do. And again, trying to move towards being able to take online coaching clients as well. And pretty soon after that, started to see that my own skill set was best suited to the podcast. And it was also the medium that was getting the most traction immediately and getting the most positive response. So rather than trying to spread myself too thin and try and be like a jack of all trades, I said, okay, this thing, let me put some focus in here. Let me not go down and try and go down the route of maybe trying to be a YouTuber or trying to be someone who writes articles every single week, because it was just going to dilute each kind of medium. And so I stuck to podcasting as kind of the number one priority at that time. And yeah, I was doing some online coaching and then kind of just grew out from there. And where it's currently at now, most of the coaching done on the site is by two coaches that work for Sigma Nutrition, Gary and Arthur, who do a great job. And I've been able to get to a point where I've mainly pulled back from the vast majority of the coaching I was doing. I still oversee some stuff for a couple of our professional fighters, but the vast majority of our typical coaching is not done by me, which just allows me to spend most of my time on content creation right now, speaking, workshops, seminars, that type of stuff.
Awesome. That's really cool. And I couldn't agree more with what you said about kind of being the jack of all trades. As they say, jack of all trades, master of none. And I think that is something that when you're first kind of starting to try and build perhaps an online presence, or maybe you're a personal trainer who is wanting to go it online, you try to do Facebook, you try to do YouTube, you try to do Instagram, podcasts, you try to do everything. And if you're trying to do everything, you can never be truly great at just one thing. So Danny, you obviously have one of, or even the best fitness podcast out there. In my eyes anyway, I personally would class it as the number one fitness podcast. And so I would love to know what it's like to be the man behind that, and kind of not only
I'm going to touch more on the actual content and the actual kind of training and nutrition and the actual practical advice we can give to the listeners in a little bit. But to begin with, I just want to know more about the business and what it's like to actually be behind the scenes in that business, and kind of the things that it's opened up to you. And just if you could just dive in and share with the listeners about just a little bit more all about it, really.
Yeah, there's probably two ways that I'll discuss. First is on the front end. Most people, when we're starting out and we're looking at people that maybe are doing things at least right in our eyes, or are doing something that we'd like to get to, typically if we're kind of following them along on social media, or we only know them from a podcast or videos or whatever, and we see them doing all this kind of cool stuff and think, oh, look how great this is, and man, they must be having so much fun, and there's this podcast and talking to all these people, and missing out that the vast majority of the time, like, my life isn't like this super roller coaster that's better than people listening. It's like most of the time it's like me in front of my laptop, just doing as much work as I can within a day, trying to keep consistent with stuff. And don't get me wrong, I'm very proud of the work that's out there, but I certainly see lots that could be done better. I think I constantly every day think I could be working harder or doing something better. And it's just the same as everyone, just trying to find something that not only I enjoy doing, but that I'm going to be consistent and keep working hard at. And really then the stuff that comes after it is just like an indirect effect, or like a side effect of just the day-to-day thing of me just sitting here for hours and doing stuff and working hard and researching things. And then when down the line somewhere, it will all look cool to someone, but it's just a side effect of being consistent with work. So it's not like I come into my office and it's like just crazy stuff happening all the time. It's pretty mundane, I would say, compared to what people might think when they look at anyone, I suppose, on social media. So but absolutely, on the other side of that, I don't want to say that I'm not grateful for it. I love what I do, and I think that when I first set out to start trying to build the business, I had a kind of few core things that were important to get to the point of. One of them was that I would be geographically independent. I think that was a term I stole from Tim Ferriss. And it was one that stood out to me of, I wanted to get to the business to a point where literally I can do it from anywhere. And at any time, I'm basically on my own schedule. And right now, that's where it's at. I can pick up my laptop and I can be pretty much anywhere in the world. And I've no set scheduled meetings most of the time within reason. And so I can work on my own schedule wherever I want. And that was kind of one of the important things to me. So I'm grateful that it's there. So I think there's a lot more I could be doing. I certainly don't have it all figured out. And there's certainly people I look around and doing a far better job than me. But at the same time, when I do look back, it has been, I've achieved some things that I kind of set out to as well.
Who is wanting to take your business online within the fitness industry, then if so, listen up, because I have a free email training for you that you can get right now if you simply just head to the show notes for this episode and then just enter your name and your email address, and you will be getting that free email training delivered to your email inbox over the course of a 2-week period. So that means that you are able to implement every single thing that I learn, because I dive in deep and I share some of the nitty gritty with you that is necessary for you to build your online fitness business. So this means that just like Danny and just like myself, you will be able to travel the world when you want, do the things that you want to do, all through taking your business online, because you're not tied down to a specific place. You don't have to trade hours of your time for money. You can actually earn a passive income, and it isn't too good to be true, because the things that I teach inside this free email training, you will be able to implement and you'll be able to see results pretty quickly. So just make sure you sign up for that by clicking the link in the show notes, because my area of expertise is helping people build their online business, whether it's in fitness or something else. But this training is specific to the fitness industry, because I know, of course, because of my love for fitness and because I built my personal brand up around fitness, I have a lot of people following me for fitness. So I wanted to create something for people who are specifically in the fitness industry, because I have been able to build up a 6-figure business within the fitness industry. So now I want to be able to teach people how to do the same thing. So you can do that by clicking the show notes, the link in the show notes. It is there for you. It is a free resource for you. If you have a friend who wants to build an online fitness business, share it with them, because it could be super valuable for them as well. So anyway, now let's get back to today's episode.
Yeah, I think you got to give yourself more credit, because what you're doing is awesome, and it's providing such a positive impact on not just kind of your own listeners, but I think there's a massive ripple effect, because I'm a massive advocate for evidence-based training and nutrition. Despite the fact that I never went to university to study any science or anything, it is something that I've always been a massive, I've always supported, and I've always tried to, I read maths, and I'm a massive fan of maths. I think it's absolutely such a brilliant thing that they have brought out and provided for the fitness industry. And I think that you're a brilliant kind of line, I suppose, between the really high level science and then the overall kind of everyday person who wants to find out more and to actually really learn about evidence-based training and nutrition. And so I think that that's really great. And it's just, it's awesome seeing the industry shift away from kind of the old kind of like a bro stuff to this new evidence-based way of thinking. And it's really cool the fact that, obviously a lot of personal trainers may listen to your podcast, and then they can implement all the stuff that they're learning with their clients, and really it's great. And as again, any listeners, you've got to go check this out if you're into evidence-based training and nutrition, which I'm sure you are if you're listening to the Business Meet Fitness podcast. Okay. So Danny, so just kind of shifting gears now, obviously, like I was saying, you've interviewed, I don't know how many episodes you have, but you have interviewed many a person, and all of these people are super intelligent people within the world of health and fitness. So I was thinking maybe it would be nice if you could share some of the biggest things that you've learned, I suppose, along the way, or perhaps some of the biggest myths that they have kind of busted, as it were, on your podcast, and what it's like what it's like having interviewed so many people.
Yeah, it is. When I think back, and I've been very fortunate to be able to talk to these people and essentially pick their brain for an hour on kind of anything that I want. It's pretty cool, and you do get to see on one extreme a wide variation in different ideas and topics and how people think, but on the other end you do start to see some patterns and commonalities pick up. And I think some of those, I suppose, a common theme that probably speaks to me a lot when we're thinking about practically what most people should be doing with their nutrition or exercise is that, and it's kind of counterintuitive, because despite the nitty gritty small little details that my podcast specifically gets into, and we could spend an hour nerding out about biochemistry or something silly, the grand scheme of it, when you peel it all back and think about, okay, for a person that wants to live healthy, be it a body composition that is good for them, enjoy their training, and be able to get all the stuff that we want from diet and exercise to help our life. What are those kind of things? And you start to see that, again, it's still some very simple core fundamental things, and it doesn't have to be pushed to any great extreme, and there's no magic trick, and there's no very specific thing you need to be doing. And you start to see, okay, if you're actually sleeping properly most of the time, if you're remaining fairly active, ideally be doing some form of regular exercise and ideally some resistance training, maybe making sure that most of your diet, but not all, is coming from decent quality food, and you're eating an appropriate amount of calories. If you did that handful of things, then you're getting the vast majority of results you ever need in terms of health. And then the kind of interesting stuff comes if we're trying to focus on a specific performance goal, or if someone's trying to really push the extremes of body composition. But for most general people, the answer isn't super complex. It's just that the body is super complex and psychology is super complex. So actually following those behaviors is the difficult thing, not understanding what we need to do. It's very, very simple from what most people should be doing. The complex thing is how do we make that happen? So that's been the big thing that stuck out to me. And I suppose a second point to that I think maybe a lot of people might not realize when they first kind of set out learning stuff, because we all kind of go through the same pattern of we have no knowledge, we start learning about something, and then we start like reading super deep into various different ideas. And then
that was me, big time. That was
everyone does it,
me.
right? and thinking that there's all these like complex, deep things to go. And then trying to optimize every single thing. And the one thing I've noticed is the people that are at the top of the industry are the people that are fairly moderate in their stance. So they understand everything, but when you see what they actually do with their own diet and how they set up their training and how they put that in perspective of their overall life, it's so much more imbalanced than maybe a lot of us tend to be when we first get into this thing, and we push things to an extreme that's just unnecessary a lot of the time. So that was a kind of a cool theme to see. And I know those two things I mentioned are a bit more abstract than actual training or nutrition advice, but we can get into that as well if you want.
Yeah, for sure. No, I because I know your work and I know your podcast and I know the things that you talk about, I must admit I've had a strong feeling you were going to say that, because I think, so I worked closely with the guys from Shredded by Science, and I know you know a couple of them. And so it's just funny because I always talk about this with them, because I used to be that person where I literally would like hear about one thing. So like I remember when I was very first starting out, it would be carb cycling. And I was like, oh my gosh, carb cycling is a solution to all my problems. I'll just start carb cycling. And I became really obsessed with it. And then it was like intermittent fasting and all these different things. And now I'm just super relaxed. I still track my macros, but I don't weigh everything out. I just kind of eyeball it, and I'm pretty flexible with it. And I never used to think that I'd be able to get to this stage. And I think there might be some people listening who are still in the stage where I was, being super, super strict on absolutely everything, trying to always like make sure everything was perfectly calculated, perfect, and like optimal post-workout meal and all this stuff. And I think like it's quite refreshing to understand that the people who have been doing it for the longest and who have been in this game for the longest have a really good balance. And it's quite nice to know that, through doing it over such a long period of time, it's likely that everybody will fall, well, not everybody, but it's likely that if you begin to realize that the majority of people are more open to kind of being more laid back with it, that's when you get these long-term results. And I think something massive is like the whole difference between the short term and the long term. And I think, like you were saying, people just really focus in on tiny little details. And it's really good to know these tiny little details if you are a really elite athlete or if you just are generally interested, but then implementing it in your own life isn't always going to be necessary. And it can potentially even cause you more stress than it's worth.
Right. Yeah, I think it speaks to kind of how we try and organize a lot of our coaching is making people aware of not only the stuff that matters, but just how much it matters. So an example would be the big one everyone talks about is if you're going to be losing body fat, we need to change your calories. So we put you in a calorie deficit. So people know that that's important and it's the main driver. But some people really overthink how precise they need to be with that. And they think, okay, my coach told me to eat 2,150 calories a day. And they will try and get as close to that number every single day as possible to the point where they're driving themselves deranged. Whereas really, that's kind of, okay, this is a good ballpark figure for you to start out on. You can probably have a range of maybe plus or minus 50 calories, 100 calories either side of that. And even beyond that, what we do with most of our clients is that could even be on average over the week. So any given day can fluctuate up and down. So now people aren't stressing about hitting a very specific number and they can't go anywhere either side of it. And plus then they're worrying about each meal because how it will influence that day's intake, rather than saying, okay, today I ended up having a bigger meal than I planned and I went over a bit of my calories, but I can account for that by taking that away from somewhere else in the week. And again, that just speaks to a more kind of flexible mindset. And it's, again, one of those misconceptions around flexible dieting that I think people have, that flexible dieting is having a flexible approach to that diet through things like that. Flexible dieting is not the same thing as getting a list of macronutrients and sticking to those. That's just not flexible. That's just as rigid as any diet you can think of. All you're doing is tracking macronutrients. So I think having, and that only comes from understanding how calories in, calories out works and how body fat works. And when you start to understand, okay, it's over a longer period of time. It doesn't happen on a day to or on one day or on a meal to meal basis. This is going to happen over a number of weeks or months on the average of what my intake is. Now you don't have to fixate on hitting a very specific number and driving yourself mad because you have a bit of flexibility either side. So that's just kind of one example I think kind of speaks to that of as we develop more and more awareness of what's actually happening, it allows more flexibility to build in because you know how to account for that stuff instead of saying, someone told me this is the number I have to eat. I have to eat it because if I don't, I won't make progress. So I think that's the kind of thing I was getting at.
Yeah, no, I really like that you bring that up actually, because I think that it's something that's so easy to forget kind of when to me, it seems very obvious now, but I didn't always used to think of it that way. And it can really, really open up your whole entire life genuinely, because it can be so paralyzing when you're trying to hit these specific numbers every day. And then maybe you go over your macros one day, and rather than, let's say you go over your macros by the equivalent of 100 calories, and then the next day you might be like, oh my gosh, I need to totally restrict my calories to something ridiculously low. When what you could simply do is just reduce them by 50 calories the next day, and then 50 calories the next day as well. However, I think this is a massive benefit, but then this can also be extremely detrimental as well. If you are somebody like me who loves food and you get into this habit of taking macros from the next day every day.
Right.
And so I'll give it a bit of an example. When I was, I did a few bikini competitions a couple of years ago, and I would literally go over my macros one day by like 300 calories. And then I'd be like, oh, I'll just take it off tomorrow's macros. And then I go over them the next day by 300 calories again. And then it would just like keep happening every single day. So I think it's also about really just being, self-aware and just holding yourself accountable as well. Because, in the bigger picture, if you go over by 100 calories one day, if you don't have a massively time pressed goal, it doesn't really matter. You can probably forget about it and move on.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think there are some kind of practical pitfalls with stuff like borrowing calories, but I think there's strategies people can still put in place to take care of that stuff. Like, for example, I know one great thing that I took from Eric Helms is when he has people borrow calories and put them somewhere else in the week, there's a cap of 20% of your daily intake. That means for someone on like 2,000 calories a day, you can go, if you want to have a bigger meal today because you're going out, you can go over your calories by up to 400 calories extra and put that somewhere else later in the week. But you can't say not eat one day and then eat 4,000 the next day and stuff like that. So having some sort of restrictions can work, and obviously depending on the individual and their coach, they can work that stuff out, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's super, super interesting. So now just kind of, again, I suppose we've talked about a few different things that you've, like the common things that you've kind of learned from people that you've had on your podcast. I'd actually just be really interested to know, have you ever had someone on the podcast and you've learned something that you just weren't expecting to find out? Has anything kind of crazy ever popped up? I'm massively putting you on the spot here because I didn't prepare you for this one.
No, I'm sure there's lots of things that I've picked up that have been intriguing or something I hadn't came across before. One particular one, I think it's episode 208. Someone could correct me. I think it's 208. There's a researcher based in New York called Herman Pontzer. And he does work on looking at energy expenditure in various different populations and tribes. And he had this kind of fascinating idea where essentially there was like this ceiling to energy expenditure that he was finding in these certain groups, or in terms of how many calories they actually needed. So there was these groups that would say be able to walk miles and miles every single day. So you'd imagine they have this huge energy expenditure. And then when you see what amount of calories they actually needed to sustain that, it was maybe a lot lower than you might predict. And when I kind of talked to him, my thought going in as well, there's just something going on here, changing their NEAT levels, and when they're not exercising, not doing enough. And I had these very different hypotheses. And he had said that kind of accounted for that, and it didn't seem to explain the differences. And so they're still trying to work some of that stuff out. So
That's interesting.
It's something that, yeah, I would recommend if people find it interesting to go and listen, because it's hard for me to kind of summarize their work in this, so it might not have made too much sense. But it's he basically had this hypothesis where I had thought I had some reasons that might explain it, and that wasn't the case.
Oh, interesting. Well, I mean, I'll leave it linked in the show notes, but yeah, like it sounds like to me, my hypothesis would be kind of that, they've adapted to this walking, and that their bodies have kind of, like adapted to it. But I mean, who knows?
Yeah, so that's another one I brought up with him, energy efficiency, that they're just more efficient at moving. And that's something they'd accounted for, but it was only a small contributor. So there was still this large unaccounted thing. So that's why that one sticks out in my memory, because there was all these different things that I would have thought based on our typical understanding of energy balance. And none of them have so far been able to fully explain the results for that group.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of an interesting one.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. All right, cool. So, I mean, we've covered a lot of really interesting stuff here. I'd love to, I guess we have a lot of kind of people who are maybe coaching themselves or who have clients, just like you guys do at Sigma. But I'd love to know kind of if you were to get people to start implementing strategies with their own clients, just through all the things that you've learned, like let's say, I don't know, it could be something like tracking macros, or like, we're touching upon flexible dieting, or like different methods of training or anything. Is there anything in particular that you've seen has been kind of a common theme that people can maybe implement in their own lives or in the lives of their clients that they could, just start doing right away to potentially maybe see good new, like better results that allow them to hit their goals more efficiently or have a better mindset towards whatever they're doing? And is there anything in particular?
Sure. So when people aren't making progress towards a goal that they have, whether it's typically to do with body composition, there's two different reasons or categories that I would use to describe that. One is that they don't have an awareness of either what they're currently doing or what they need to do. And the second one is they know what they need to be doing, but they don't have any systems in place to able to be followed through on those behaviors and habits. So if we look at the first one, awareness, this could be someone who thinks they're eating healthily, but has no idea just how much they're consuming, right? So this would be someone who would be best served from either keeping a food diary or tracking their intake in MyFitnessPal or taking pictures of their food, whatever method you want to pick and would be suitable for that person. Something, just even if they did it for only 1 or 2 weeks. And straight away, it builds an awareness of what foods they're consuming, how many times a day they're snacking, the portion sizes they're using, how many calories are in foods that they might not have been aware of, and then just how much overall they're eating that is maybe far different from what they actually presumed. So it's building an awareness of what they're doing. And at the same time, it's also getting them throughout the day to think about, okay, what am I actually eating? What is my next choice going to be? As opposed to just like mindlessly snacking on stuff or just grabbing whatever's convenient. So I think if it's a client like that, we'd work on the kind of awareness idea and then see what they're doing and what is the kind of 1 or 2 changes that immediately would have a knock-on effect. If it's someone who kind of is aware kind of what they're doing, is trying to put in place a particular type of dietary approach, but after a while is just failing to adhere to that or comply with the diet because of whatever reason it's too difficult, or something in their work schedule throws it off, or they're going out with friends, or whatever it is, we'll try and find, okay, what is it that they're not following through with? What is that reason, and how can we build in something that will make it easier? So if it's that they're finding that they're just throwing their week off because they go out for a big meal of a Friday evening with friends, and therefore they're like, oh, well, I've ruined my diet now anyway, and then they just overeat for the weekend. We'll start by, let's play around with how we fit out their week to maybe allow them a bit more on the Friday, and then put in place a behavior that starts them off on a good foot on Saturday. Just make them aware of it maybe is enough sometimes. So whatever is going on, trying to find a solution that fits in with that person to make it easier. And that'll just depend on what their schedule is. One other thing I'd add on to the end of that's probably just a bigger idea in coaching in general that sometimes gets lost nowadays, I think, that dramatically will improve the chance of someone being successful, is people remembering what the art of coaching actually is. And then it's being able to communicate with someone as a person and understanding what they're doing, being able to talk to them about it, and being able to give them some recommendations that are actually useful to them as an individual. Like they probably know that they should be eating less calories. They probably know they should be eating like more vegetables. They probably know they should be training more consistently. It's how do you help them through that by fitting it within their own lifestyle, their own schedule, talking to them about what their issues are, and remembering that the feedback you get and how you monitor that client could include a lot of subjective information. So like one like super powerful question to get people to answer, whether it's via email or just by asking them, is to ask them how their week went, what could have gone better, and why do they think it didn't go as well as they would have liked, or some variation on those questions, and just to hear what they're saying back, because usually you can get quite a lot of informative information just from a subjective question like that, as opposed to thinking we need to just base everything on, okay, what was their calories this week, what was their macros each day, and did it change or not? And if their body weight didn't change, we're going to just change their macros, instead of thinking about, okay, well, what is actually going on with this person in terms of how they're feeling, what each day presented, and so on. I think there's a lot of good stuff you can get from that people can miss out on if we forget about that part of the coaching side.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. So true. So valuable. So I have a few clients kind of, we have this strength feed coaching, and so we have clients under that, and we have like this massive kind of list of very subjective questions, and we get them to rate themselves out of 10 as well, just because then they can just be really transparent with us and how they believe they've done, and then obviously like we'll give them feedback. And a lot of times you find that people are way too critical on themselves, and they think they've done way worse than they actually have. They'll have like hit their macros plus or minus 2% even sometimes, and they'll be like, oh, I was 2 out of 10. And it's just like, oh my gosh, no, you weren't. You've done way better than you thought. And so I think sometimes people just need a bit of assurance. And whether you're a coach or not, this is, valuable, because you need to realize that you're never going to, you can't be 100% perfect 100% of the time. And, you have to realize that being, 60% on it is better than just totally blowing it all out the window. So yeah, just being very aware of yourself, and that comes over time. So yeah, really, really valuable. So Danny, I just wanted to ask you, obviously, we talked at the beginning about how you work yourself, you have your own business and all this. So I'd love to know, what is your favorite thing about working for yourself?
Oh, I think it's, some of the stuff I mentioned earlier, the kind of flexibility that it allows, that's really the big thing for me. Not having from week to week, a specific kind of schedule that's the same year round. Like it'll change from each week. I kind of can dictate when I'm going to be doing things, what time that's going to be at. I can, for example, go to the gym and train at the time of day that I want to, not based on when I'm not working. It can be that I can go and do it from anywhere, which is a kind of big thing for me, that kind of ability to move around with it. And I think then the biggest thing and a huge thing for me is probably being just the people it allows you to meet as well. Just the amount of doors that doing this has just opened for me is stuff that I never would have planned beforehand, and I wouldn't have been able to have planned. Even when I think of like, if I had to lay out a business plan when I first started, like there's ways now that the business runs that I just wouldn't have been able to predict. I just didn't even know it was possible, and had never set out to try and get, but certain opportunities just come out of nowhere because of, for long enough, you go through the process of trying to do important work, trying to do stuff that'll be useful to people, and you just do it consistently enough, and then stuff you just didn't plan will turn up. So I think that's where the motivation for doing something is very important. If you go in with, I'm going to do this work because then I will get this off this person, or I'll make this money here, like it's just, it very rarely works out. And I think when people go in of the motivation of, I like doing this, I think I can help people, and then that allows them to do it for longer, you're amazed that suddenly people will provide you opportunities you didn't know even existed. So that's been the biggest thing that I think that I'm grateful for, is just being, the opportunities have been afforded just because of this kind of cool thing we can do now of helping people through the internet and talking about nutrition and training that we love doing anyway. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really true. And that's something that I always talk about. It's about, focusing on providing value first rather than focusing on the number of followers that you have or the number of downloads that your podcast episode is getting. Because I think if you focus on the value that you can add first and focus on really just building up your, a community of people and connecting with people on a deep level, your followers will come naturally, and there'll be followers who are truly invested and who truly care about what it is that you have to say. And so that's something that, I'm so all about. I think there's tons of gurus out there who are teaching like grow 5,000 followers in a week. And they're teaching people how to grow followers, but they're not teaching people how to build a personal brand and like a community of people that really care about what they have to say. And that's evidently something that you've done extremely, extremely well. So I just want to thank you for your service to the fitness industry. It's awesome. I mean, it's your podcast has taught me so much, like honestly, more than you can imagine. So it's absolutely amazing. And just being able to kind of relay the stuff that I've learned to my own audience. Of course, I don't post as much fitness content, like specific kind of in-depth scientific stuff as I used to. However, I used to post it a lot, and it was a lot of it was stuff that I've learned from you, from various other people. But yeah, it's been fabulous having you on today. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks so much. I honestly, hearing those words is very kind, and I really, really do appreciate it. So thank you for those, Lauren, and thanks for asking me on. I enjoy talking about stuff like this all the time anyway, so it was a pleasure, and hopefully at least a few people found something in there interesting.
Yeah, no, they definitely will. And if they didn't, they can go check out your podcast. So it's a win-win anyway, really. So I'll leave a link to all of your stuff. It's just Sigma Nutrition Radio, and I'll leave all your links to all your social handles and stuff in the show notes. Perfect. Just so people can click a lot easier than, it's always like people are always like, where are you on social media? And then they start listing all these things, but it's easier in the show notes. Yeah,
just click it in. Yeah, that's where people want to go.
That's what they want.
If they really want to find me, they can find me. Yeah, I'm not hidden away.
I love that. Love that. No, thank you so much for coming on today, Danny.
Lauren, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And that wraps up today's episode of the Business Meets Fitness podcast. I hope you absolutely loved it. If you did, please share this with a friend. Remember, through sharing it with a friend, you're not only helping me, you're also helping them, and you're also helping yourself, because if you're sharing awesome things with them, your friend will be really thankful. And yeah, I just think that this is a super valuable episode. I think that a friend or a client of yours will absolutely love it. So yeah, just share it with one person. It would mean the world to me. Of course, if you also choose to leave me a review on iTunes, it would mean so much. And yeah, let's get this podcast ranking, guys. Come on, I know we can do it. I know you can help me, but that's all I need. I just need you to help me. I also need you to help me know what guests you'd like me to bring on. Also tell the guest that you want them to come on the Business Meets Fitness podcast, so that then if I reach out to them, they are already aware of the podcast. So that is that for today. I hope you've loved it. Do share it with just one person. That's all I ask. I will see you in the next episode.